You know, when you hear the Satanic Bible, your mind probably conjures up some pretty dramatic imagery.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's got that immediate reaction, doesn't it?
Yeah, but what really struck me digging into these excerpts he sent over is, well, how much of it seems to be about peeling back layers of pretense,
Yeah.
questioning why we believe what we do.
Right.
And even this rather defiant call for personal power, it wasn't quite what I expected.
That unexpected angle is really key to understanding Anton LaVey, I think.
Yeah.
And this deep dive, it's focused entirely on the Satanic Bible.
Using the materials provided.
Exactly, drawing directly from those PDF excerpts you have. It means we can go straight to the source, explore his core ideas as he put them.
And hopefully, yeah, shed some light on maybe some initial assumptions.
Exactly. The name itself, it carries such a strong weight.
Definitely.
But when you get into his actual words, like you said, a more complex picture starts to emerge.
Yeah.
Still controversial, of course, but complex.
So our goal here is to really dissect these excerpts, try and understand what motivated LaVey.
And examine some of the more provocative bits of his philosophy. We want to do this efficiently, give you a real sense of what's important in this text without getting bogged down.
Agreed. And look, it's totally natural to approach this topic with, some preconceived notions. We all do.
Absolutely.
But as we explore LaVey's arguments in his own voice from these texts, maybe try to keep an open mind, there are some genuinely interesting, albeit challenging, perspectives in there.
Okay, so let's start with his background then. One of the recurring anecdotes, and it's right there in the excerpts, is about his time playing the organ in a carnival.
Right, the carnival organ player.
He talked about observing people indulging in, well, let's just say the full spectrum of human behavior on Saturday nights,
Letting loose.
only to see those same individuals in church on Sunday morning seeking forgiveness. That seems like a pretty pivotal moment for him.
It really does. And what's fascinating here, maybe a key insight for listeners, is how that firsthand experience, seeing what he considered stark hypocrisy.
Became a cornerstone of his entire philosophy. He literally witnessed this massive disconnect between people's natural desires and the religious rules condemning them.
He says it right there, doesn't he?
He does. As he put it, he knew then that the Christian church thrives on hypocrisy and that man's carnal nature will out no matter how much it is purged or scourged.
So his whole system, in a way, it feels like a reaction against that perceived double standard.
Absolutely. A reaction against duplicity.
Mm.
And he didn't just, observe it and move on.
No, he acted on it. In 1966, on Walpurgisnacht, which is a date kind of steeped in occult lore, right?
It's a very significant date.
He shaved his head, put on a clerical collar, and bam, announced the founding of the Church of Satan.
It's quite the statement.
Pretty theatrical, calling it a church. Openly advocating for black magic. That was definitely not the usual
It
approach.
was entirely deliberate.
Yeah.
A provocative act of rebellion against, well, established religion and other occult traditions of the time. Well, by using the term church, he's directly challenging the existing religious power structure using their own language.
Okay.
And openly embracing black magic, instead of keeping it hidden like many groups did, that was a direct confrontation. He saw hypocrisy everywhere, basically.
In his view of Satan, it wasn't the, horns and pitchfork guy.
Not in his interpretation, no. He describes Satan as things like the spirit of progress, the inspirer of all great movements, even the embodiment of all heresies that liberate.
So less a literal being and more a symbol.
Exactly. A symbol of opposition to what he saw as life-denying doctrines. It wasn't about worshiping some external evil deity, but embracing a principle of earthly indulgence, self-determination, rebellion against restrictive beliefs.
Interesting. He also seemed to draw on older ideas.
Yeah, he mentions engaging with pre-war European occult philosophies, and he developed this concept called the law of the trapezoid.
Which sounds specific.
It does, yeah. It suggests maybe a more intellectual underpinning related to energy dynamics, interconnectedness, things like that. More than just pure rebellion.
And he wasn't shy about the media either, was he?
Not at all. His involvement in television and film definitely played a role in shaping the public image of Satanism, often, let's be honest, in a pretty sensationalized way.
Okay, so he's founded his church. He's got this alternative view of Satan. What are the core philosophical tenets that come out of this? What did he really want people to take away?
Well, a central theme maybe the central theme, is prioritizing indulgence over abstinence.
Life is the great indulgence.
Death, the great abstinence. Exactly. That's a famous LaVey quote. He completely rejected denying yourself in this life for some, maybe, reward after death.
He saw that as a basic flaw in Christianity.
Absolutely. He argued it thrived on suppressing natural human desires.
Yeah.
So the key insight here is that LaVey's philosophy fundamentally values the here and now, earthly fulfillment.
Right, which circles back to his carnival days, doesn't it? People living one way privately, another publicly, caught in that cycle of doing it, feeling guilty, repenting.
Rinse and repeat.
He seems to be advocating for just embracing those natural urges instead.
Pretty much. And that leads straight into his rejection of traditional morality. He brings up this idea of diabolical indignation, basically arguing that the devil, or the concept of Satan, has been unfairly demonized, unfairly maligned.
Okay.
In the Book of Satan, which is part of the Satanic Bible, he lays out statements that directly challenge conventional wisdom. He questions love one another as the ultimate rule.
Instead advocating for
Self-preservation, a kind of reciprocal justice, an eye for an eye.
with compound interest, I think it said.
Yeah, exactly. It's a radical departure from turning the other cheek. It's all about personal agency, a strong sense of self-interest, defending yourself.
That's a pretty stark contrast to mainstream religious ideas.
Huge contrast. And he promotes this idea of being your own redeemer. No need for external saviors, no divine authority telling you what's what.
You're in charge of yourself.
Completely.
Yeah.
The blessings he talks about aren't about heavenly grace. They're about strength, power, destroying false hope, prioritizing yourself.
Even Lucifer gets a makeover.
Right. Lucifer becomes the bearer of light, the personification of enlightenment, a total flip from the traditional Christian view. For LaVey, doubt isn't a sin. It's like essential for intellectual freedom. Mental emancipation, he calls it.
So what about practices like prayer, confession, big parts of many faiths?
He pretty much dismisses them, sees them as signs of apprehension, maybe inaction. Why pray and hope when you can take direct action?
Confession.
Pointless hypocrisy, in his view, if there's no real remorse or plan to change. Just going through the motions.
He goes even further, doesn't he? Saying all spiritual religions are basically man-made.
Yes, all religions of a spiritual nature are inventions of man. Which leads to this really interesting concept. The God you save may be yourself. Explain that a bit.
Well, the idea is if humans create gods in their own image, projecting their desires and needs onto them, why not just cut out the middleman? Acknowledge you're doing it.
And even worship. That self-created God, which is essentially your own carnal nature, your own being, it puts the individual right at the center of their own universe, morally speaking.
That's profoundly individualistic, almost radically so.
It really is. And it even extends to how he looks at the 7 deadly sins.
Pride, envy, greed, all that.
Yeah. Instead of seeing them as inherently evil, LaVey argues they're actually rooted in natural human instincts, things crucial for survival, even enjoyment of life.
So distilling that down, the core insight isn't just chaos, but maybe a radical rethinking of what actually serves individual well-being.
I think that's a fair way to put it, even if it clashes hard with societal norms or traditional religious views.
So instead of condemning these so-called sins, he's almost saying, hey, these are just part of being human.
In a way, yes. Reframing them, saying they've been unfairly demonized by religions that want to control those impulses.
Okay, this all feels like a very, very direct challenge to Christianity and other religions. Let's dig into some of his specific criticisms there.
Yeah, his accusations of Christian hypocrisy are definitely a recurring theme. We already talked about the carnival anecdote.
Right, the Saturday night, Sunday morning thing.
But he also points to things like Christianity adopting pagan rituals throughout history while condemning paganism.
Like Christmas trees or Easter eggs, that kind of thing.
Potentially, yeah. He argues that while Christians might condemn worldly pleasures, their own gatherings, like church socials or potlucks, often become opportunities for similar kinds of indulgence, just relabeled.
Interesting point. He also questions how there can be so many different interpretations of God within Christianity itself.
And the logic behind praying for your enemies. He finds that contradictory, or at least questions the motivation behind it. Is it genuine compassion or something else?
He brings up the Yazidi belief, too, which was fascinating.
Yeah, that's a really interesting counterpoint he uses, the idea of focusing on appeasing the devil, because God is seen as inherently good and forgiving anyway.
So why waste time pleasing God? Focus on the one who might actually cause trouble.
It highlights just how differently cultures can conceptualize the divine
Right.
and our relationship to it.
He also talks about Christian atheists. What did he mean by that?
He saw that as another example of internal contradictions. People who might intellectually doubt the traditional God concept, but still identify culturally or habitually as Christian.
Sort of clinging to the label without the core belief?
That seems to be his argument, yeah.
Yeah.
He basically contends that society has changed so much that many traditional religious rules are just obsolete, outdated.
So why keep pretending to follow teachings you don't really believe or practice consistently?
That's the question he poses, which leads to another crucial question people ask about his work.
Which is?
Why call it Satanism? Why not just call it humanism? Or something less? Well, less loaded, less confrontational.
Good question. Does he answer that?
He does, directly. He argues that while humanism is a philosophy, it generally lacks the ritual, the ceremony, the dogma that he believes many people actually need psychologically.
Ah, so Satanism provides that structure.
In his view, yes. It provides both the philosophy and the ritualistic framework. He also makes a point of distinguishing Satanism from what he calls white witchcraft.
How so?
He criticizes his emphasis on pure altruism. He saw that with suspicion, calling it things like sinning on the layaway plan.
Meaning what? Like being good now, hoping for a payoff later, even if it's subconscious?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
He felt it was often rooted in guilt or denial of self-interest. Satanism, he asserts, is more honest. It's a form of controlled selfishness.
Controlled selfishness.
Meaning, you might be kind or generous to loved ones, but ultimately it stems from your own fulfillment or pleasure in doing so. It's still rooted in self-gratification.
Which fits with his modified golden rule.
Exactly. Do unto others as they do unto you. Reciprocity and self-preservation, not turn the other cheek altruism.
Okay, so it is a structured system. It has ceremonies, principles, even if they often invert traditional ones. Let's move into that practical side. Satanic ritual and magic. What does that actually look like in his framework?
Well, first, it's really important to separate the pop culture image of a black mass from what LaVey actually describes.
Right, the Hollywood version.
Exactly. He explicitly says the black mass, as usually depicted with like desecrating hosts and all that, is not the main magical ceremony for Satanists.
So what is it then?
He sees it more as a form of psychodrama, a parody specifically of the Roman Catholic Mass, used maybe cathartically or symbolically, but not the core magical practice.
Okay, so what is the core practice?
He divides satanic magic into two main types, greater magic and lesser magic.
Greater and lesser.
Greater magic is the big stuff, formal ritual, ceremonial magic. It's about directing intense emotional energy towards a specific goal, like personal change or influencing external events.
And lesser magic.
That's more subtle. It's manipulative, non-ritualistic. Think everyday psychological tactics, using charm, persuasion, maybe even deception, to influence people and situations. Getting what you want without a full-blown ceremony.
He connects words like fascination and glamour to this, right?
Yeah.
Saying they have occult roots.
Yeah, he traces them back to meaning, essentially casting a spell or influencing someone's perception through non-ritual means. Lesser magic is about mastering those everyday interactions.
Got it. So, focusing on greater magic, the formal rituals, he outlines 3 types of satanic ritual based on emotion.
That's right. They're categorized by the main emotion being channeled: sex, compassion, and destruction.
Okay, break those down.
Sex rituals are about lust, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
aimed at creating desire, attracting a partner, that sort of thing. Compassion rituals are for positive outcomes, health, success, helping yourself, or someone you care about. It's driven by sentiment.
And destruction.
That's for channeling negative emotions, anger, hatred, resentment, essentially performing a hex or a curse against someone you feel has wronged you, expressing that destructive energy ritually.
And what does he say you need for these rituals to work? The ingredients, so to speak.
He lists a few key things. First, desire. You need that strong motivation, the emotional drive. Without real desire, the ritual is pointless.
Makes sense.
Second, timing. He emphasizes picking the right moment, ideally when the target of the ritual is most receptive, maybe asleep, daydreaming, bored, times when their mental defenses might be lower. He even mentions the menstrual cycle for women as a factor in receptivity.
Interesting. What else?
Imagery, using symbols, specific clothing, scents, music, anything that helps intensify the core emotion you're working with, making it vivid.
Sensory aids.
Exactly. Then there's direction, having a clear focus for that energy. And finally, something he calls the balance factor.
The balance factor.
Yeah, basically being realistic, aligning your desires with your actual capabilities. Trying to magically achieve something totally outside your potential is just setting yourself up for failure and disappointment, he argues. Know your limits.
Okay, that sounds fairly pragmatic in a way. Now, what about the actual steps, the mechanics of a ritual? He gives quite a bit of detail in the excerpts.
He does lay out a framework. He calls it the 13 steps. It covers things like the proper attire.
Black robes for men, something more revealing for women.
Yes, that's how he describes it, suggesting clothing that aligns with or enhances the ritual's emotional intent, particularly sexual energy, if relevant. It also covers the arrangement of the ritual space.
The altar is important.
Very. And notably, he mentions that in some group rituals, the altar can actually be a living woman.
Wow, okay.
The symbol of Baphomet is central, placed above the altar. Candles are used black for power or curses, white often symbolically representing the target of destruction, not purity.
What about sound?
A bell is rung, usually at the beginning and end, for purification and finality. There's a chalice holding what he calls the elixir of ecstasy.
Which is?
Just a stimulating drink, basically. Something to heighten the senses. A sword symbolizes power and force.
He mentions a phallus, too.
Yes, sometimes used in group rituals as a symbol of fertility, life force, generation again, connecting to that carnal, creative energy within his framework.
And a gong.
Used to call upon what he terms the forces of darkness, essentially tapping into that primal, hidden aspect of nature and the self. And parchment is used, too.
For writing things down.
Right. Writing requests or curses, which are then read aloud and burned in the candle flame, symbolizing their release into the ether.
He also brings in other systems like Enochian keys.
From the Book of Leviathan section, he incorporates the Enochian keys, which is a system of angelic or, in this context, perhaps demonic language derived from 16th century occultism. It adds another layer of structure and perceived power to the rituals.
It sounds very structured, despite the focus on raw emotion. He also talks about psychic vampires, which sounds like something out of a movie.
Yeah, but he means it in a more mundane, psychological sense.
Not literal vampires.
No. He describes them as people who just drain your energy. Manipulators, guilt trippers, constant complainers, individuals who feed off others' attention and vitality without giving anything back.
And she gives advice on dealing with them.
He does. Pretty practical stuff, actually. Play dumb, don't engage with their drama, learn to say no firmly but maybe graciously. It fits his theme of self-preservation. Don't let others exploit you emotionally.
Okay. Now we have to address the really extreme ideas often associated with Satanism, like human sacrifice. He talks about that, right?
He does address it, yes.
Yeah.
Though, importantly, probably not in the literal physical sense most people imagine.
How does he frame it?
He presents it controversially as a potentially justifiable act symbolically, directed towards someone who has caused you significant unjust harm. It's about venting extreme rage.
So more of a ritual curse.
Largely, yes. He calls the ideal sacrifice someone who's inflicted severe emotional pain, someone deserving of your wrath. For most followers, it's understood as a ritual focusing of destructive energy, a powerful symbolic act, not actual murder.
Still pretty intense stuff.
Absolutely. It's deliberately provocative language.
Okay, and finally, this idea of life after death through fulfillment of the ego, that sounds very self-focused. What's the thinking there?
It is extremely self-focused. He contrasts it directly with ideas like reincarnation.
He thinks reincarnation is a cop-out.
Essentially, yeah.
Sure.
A form of self-deception, maybe avoiding responsibility for this life by dreaming of past or future ones. LaVeyan Satanism, he states, demands the complete fulfillment of your ego yourself in this lifetime.
Get everything you can now.
That's the idea. He believed that only by fully embracing and satisfying your own needs and desires now can you genuinely be kind to others without secretly resenting it or diminishing yourself.
And this ties into birthdays.
Exactly. He considered one's own birthday the most important holiday in Satanism, a direct celebration of your own existence, your own godhood, if you will. Self-celebration is key.
Wow. Okay. So after this deep dive into LaVey's The Satanic Bible, drawing from these excerpts, what are the key takeaways for you, the insights that really stand out?
Well, for me, several things are particularly striking. First, that fundamental critique of hypocrisy, especially in established religion.
Yeah.
It just feels like such a powerful driving force behind everything he wrote.
Yeah, that comes through loud and clear.
Second, the way he completely reinterprets traditional concepts, like sin, or Satan himself, turning them from literal evils into symbols of human nature, rebellion, liberation from restrictive rules. It's incredibly thought-provoking, whether you agree or not.
Definitely makes you think differently about those terms.
And third, maybe surprisingly, despite all the emphasis on raw emotion and personal desire, there's actually a very structured approach to the ritual and magic side of things. It's just a more developed, maybe coherent system than just, do whatever feels good.
Right. It's not pure anarchy. It has its own internal logic, its own rules.
Exactly.
And for you, the listener, maybe the takeaway is even if you completely disagree with or reject these ideas, just understanding them can offer a really unique lens, a lens to look at societal norms, religious practices, maybe even your own motivations. It kind of prompts you to think critically about why certain values are held and what really drives human behavior.
And that raises a really important question to maybe mull over after this.
Mm.
How do these ideas, especially the focus on self-interest, the critique of traditional morality,
hmm
how do they challenge or maybe even reinforce your own understanding of right and wrong? What ultimately motivates us?
Definitely a lot to chew on there. If this deep dive into the Satanic Bible has sparked your curiosity, I definitely encourage you to maybe explore the source material further for yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot more detail and nuance in those pages than we could possibly cover here.
Absolutely, it might spark even more questions and learning.